Walk into a gun shop today and stand near the rack where an old M1 sits behind glass. You will still hear someone repeat the clean version that he got nothing, that they used him up and let him go without a second thought. The man who built America's rifle, the one that went to war twice and never came back empty-handed, walked away with a medal and a handshake and not $1 more than his government salary. That is the version people tell. Nobody at that counter has read the note from the Attorney General's office from 1944. Nobody needs to. The myth does the work the paperwork never did. But the paperwork is still there. And what it says about John Garand and about the country that paid him is stranger and colder and harder to be angry about than the story at the gun counter will ever admit. His name was John Cantius Garand, and by 1941, half of Springfield, Massachusetts could tell you how to say it wrong. He came from a Quebec farmhouse with 11 brothers and sisters, from a tool-making shop in Providence, Rhode Island, where his hands were already trained on precision machine work before most men his age had settled on a trade. By the time he walked into Springfield Armory in November of 1919, he was already the kind of man other machinists stopped to watch. In January of 1936, he signed over every patent on the rifle to the United States government. There would be no private company, no manufacturer's contract, no royalty check arriving each quarter. He had traded ownership for a government paycheck, and in 1941, that trade was about to be tested in front of Congress. Colonel G. H. Stewart had been pushing since 1939 to get Garand paid for what the rifle had already proven itself to be. Stewart had watched the design come together piece by piece, the gas system, the 8-round clip, the machine work that turned Garand's stubborn instincts into a rifle the Army could actually issue. He had watched Garand solve problems the Army's own ordnance officers had given up on, and he believed the country owed this man something beyond a civil service title and a pat on the back. On July 9, 1941, Representative Charles Clayson introduced the bill into the House. $100,000 described plainly as additional remuneration for services the government had already technically covered with a salary. Somewhere in Washington, a clerk filed the paperwork next to 100 other private relief bills nobody outside their own districts would ever hear about. Picture that House chamber the week the bill came up. No cameras, no fanfare, just a number on a page, and men deciding whether an inventor's work was worth $100,000 of the Treasury's money in a year when every dollar was already being fought over for a war that had not officially started yet. The men in that room knew the rifle. Some of them had watched demonstrations. Some of them had read the reports from the field. They knew what Garand had produced, and they had the bill in front of them. And they still had to decide whether what he had already been paid was enough, or whether the country owed him something the salary had never been designed to cover. Back in Springfield, none of that ceremony reached the shop floor. Garand kept working. That is the part people forget. While Congress argued over what he was owed, he was still at his bench, still running gauges, still solving the same production problems that had made him valuable in the first place. His salary told its own story. He started in 1919 making $1,800 a year. By 1942, he was earning $8,000. Not a fortune, but real money. And by wartime, civil service standards close to the ceiling. He was not a forgotten man in a forgotten shop. He was the highest paid engineer at Springfield Armory, and everyone who mattered in that building already knew it. Stewart knew it too. He had filed the bill anyway because he believed The salary and the debt were two different things entirely. Congress did not agree. The bill died quietly. No dramatic speech killed it. No rival stood up to attack Garand's character. It simply did not get the votes, and it disappeared into the same pile as every other private relief bill that year. 3 years later, in 1944, a note attributed to the Attorney General's office surfaced that explained exactly why. It confirmed, plainly, that John Garand had been one of the highest paid men at the Armory for his entire career. He was not underpaid, and he was not overlooked. He was paid consistently at a level the government considered fair for critical wartime work, year after year, without complaint on either side. That single fact changes the shape of the whole story. This was not Congress turning its back on a struggling genius. It was Congress looking at a well-compensated employee and deciding a bonus on top of a good salary was harder to justify than sentiment alone could carry. Somewhere inside that vote sat a quiet, almost bureaucratic logic. The man had already been paid what the country believed his work was worth, and asking for more, however deserved it felt to the men who had watched him work, ran straight into a ledger that said otherwise. There is no clear villain hiding anywhere in that ledger, and that is what makes the story so uncomfortable. It would be easier if some senator had stood up and insulted the man whose rifle was already carrying American soldiers through North Africa and the Pacific. Instead, the country's gratitude ran into its own paperwork, and the paperwork won. Garand was not wronged by cruelty. He was caught by consistency. The same system that had paid him fairly for 20 years used that fairness as the reason not to pay him more. Colonel Stewart had argued otherwise from the inside and lost. He had spent 2 years building a case, gathering the testimony of men who had stood next to Garand on the shop floor, watched him fix what others could not, and believed the country's debt ran deeper than any paycheck could settle. The bill he had championed died without a floor debate, without a named opponent, without even the dignity of a clean refusal. Stewart went back to his desk. Garand went back to his bench. Neither one made a public statement about it. So the country reached for the only other currency it had left. In September of 1941, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers gave him the Holly Medal, an honor that had gone to men like Henry Ford. He received a medal for meritorious service that same year, and in 1944, a medal for merit from the government itself. None of it carried a dollar figure. All of it said, in its own formal language, that the country knew exactly what he had done. It simply was not going to write him a second check for having done it. Garand stayed at Springfield Armory until his retirement in 1953, still refining designs, still solving problems most engineers never saw coming until he had already fixed them. By then, his rifle had done more than anyone in that 1941 chamber could have predicted. It was carried by American soldiers through the Second World War, then again into Korea, with more than 6.5 million built before production finally slowed. General George Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. Garand read praise like that the same way he read his own paycheck, quietly, and without much comment either way. He died in 1974, and the myth outlived the paperwork almost immediately. Somewhere along the way, the story simplified itself into something cleaner and angrier than what actually happened. It is not hard to understand why that version survives. It is simpler, and it fits what people already want to believe about how the country treats the men who build things for it. But the ledger tells something quieter and stranger. He was paid well, honored formally, and still somehow sent home without the one number that would have made the story feel finished to everyone watching. That number was $100,000. Stewart had asked for it on behalf of a man who had never asked for anything himself. Congress had the bill in front of them. The rifles were already in the field, and the vote still went the same way. 6.5 million rifles later, the man who built them never saw it. Whether the debt was settled is the question the paperwork answered, and the gun counter never will. Subscribe if you want more of these old American arguments pulled back out into the light. And tell me in the comments what you think. Was Congress right to call that debt settled? Or did the man who built the rifle deserve more than a medal for carrying his country through 2 wars?